The dingo was already working at the brush pile when Hugh Tinney stopped his bullocks on the road outside Berrima. It wasn't moving the way a dingo moves when it's found something small. It was digging with its whole body. Shoulders low, claws raking at branches stacked deliberately against the roadside scrub. Branches that hadn't fallen there. Branches that had been placed. Tinney walked over. The dingo held its ground for a moment, then slipped back into the tree line. Tinney moved the branches aside with his boot. What he found on February 19th, 1842, was the beginning of the end for a man who had already killed 10 people and had never once been held accountable for any of them. This is Australia's most cold-blooded serial killer. His name was John Lynch, and the most unsettling thing about him isn't how he killed, is how easily, every single time, everyone believed him. To understand what lay beneath that brush pile, you first have to understand a ghost from 1836, because the body Tinney found that morning was not the beginning of Lynch's story. It was closer to the end. The beginning was a man named Thomas Smyth, already 6 years in the ground by then, buried in a churchyard at Sutton Forest, killed by Lynch, who walked out of court a free man and kept walking for 6 more years. Smyth had been a convict plowman, transported to New South Wales and assigned to the Oldbury estate near Sutton Forest, where the summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, and the work was relentless, and the rewards were small. In June of 1829, and he entered the Sutton Forest plowing match, a local competition where men stood their work beside other men's work and let it be judged. He put his name on the list. He showed up. That tells you who Thomas Smyth was. Someone who had arrived at the far end of the world with a conviction on his record and built something he was proud enough to present publicly. He would not live another decade. John Lynch arrived in the colony in October 1832, transported from County Cavan on a charge of false pretenses. He was 19 years old, short and compact. With an Irish accent he would carry his whole life, and a quality that would prove more dangerous than anything else about him. He could make people trust him almost immediately. He was assigned to the same district as Smyth, the same red earth, the same farms. On the surface lies 2 convict laborers going about their work. Beneath it, Lynch was already organizing, robbing with a loose gang, taking what they could and moving on. The only thing that could destroy an operation like that was someone talking to the authorities. Thomas Smyth talked. He gave evidence against Lynch and his associates. And on March 4th, 1836, he was murdered at Oldbury Farm, with Lynch directly connected to the act. The case went to court. The jury came back with a verdict, acquittal. Lynch walked out. Smyth went into the ground, and Lynch carried forward into the next decade the precise knowledge that he could kill a man who had betrayed him, stand in a court of law, and walk away clean. That knowledge didn't make him careful, it made him certain. He spent years in convict labor gangs after that, and in June of 1839, turned up at a police station with a stab wound and a rehearsed story about 3 men attacking him in his sleep. He'd had practice by then. The mechanics of the alternative account, the way authority figures, who were overworked and under-resourced, tended to reach for the simplest explanation available. In 1841, John Lynch received his certificate of freedom. He was 28 years old. He knew the Berrima district. He had a tomahawk. And he had not once, in 5 years of escalating violence, been made to answer for any of it. He stole 8 bullocks from Farmer Humphrey at the Oldbury estate and drove them north to sell. On the road, he fell in with a ticket of leave carrier named Edmund Ireland, transporting produce to Sydney for a man we'll call the owner Cowper. Ireland had a young Aboriginal boy as his offsider. Lynch offered company on the road. Ireland accepted. The boy had no vote in it. They camped together. In the morning, Lynch killed them both with the tomahawk. What he did next tells you everything about how his mind worked. Rather than running, he loaded Ireland's goods, set the bullock team loose toward Berrima to be found by whoever found it, and set out calmly for Sydney, where he ran directly into the owner Cowper on the road near George's River. The man who owned every item Lynch had just stolen from a man Lynch had just killed. Lynch told him Ireland had been injured, said Ireland had asked Lynch personally to complete the delivery. Cowper believed him. Lynch sold the goods privately and disappeared south. By now, Lynch had killed 3 people. And what he was experiencing, he would later describe this with unsettling clarity, was not fear. It was confirmation. God, he believed, was watching over him. Each clean escape was evidence. Each man who trusted him and died for it was proof that a larger permission had been granted. That theological confidence is the key to understanding what came next, because a man operating from fear might have stopped after Ireland. Lynch didn't stop. He accelerated. Back near Razorback Mountain, he met a father and son named Fraser, transporting horses for their employer, Samuel Bawtrey. He traveled with them to Cordo's Flat, 2.5 miles outside Berrima, killed both in the morning, buried both in the bush, rode into Berrima by afternoon. 5 people dead now, none of it yet understood as crime, none of it yet connected. Lynch moving through the district like a man with appointments to keep. In Berrima, he had business with a man named Mulligan at a farm called Wombat Brush. Money owed, or claimed to be. The negotiation did not go well for Mulligan. It didn't go well for his wife Bridget either, or for her 2 stepchildren, a boy named Johnny and a 14-year-old girl named Mary. Lynch burned the bodies, walked to the farm's landlord, and introduced himself as a man named John Dunleavy, who had purchased the Mulligan lease for £700. The Mulligans had left town, he explained, to avoid trouble over illegal grog selling. The neighbors accepted this without particular difficulty. John Dunleavy settled into the farm, managed it, needed produce, moved to market. In early 1842, traveling north through Picton on his return from Sydney, he met a farmhand named Kearns Landrigan. Landrigan had just finished a job and had £40 on him, all his wages, everything he'd earned. They ate together that evening at the Woolpack Inn in Natai, and by all accounts they got along well. Lynch offered work. Landrigan said yes. They camped that night by the Ironstone Bridge, a few miles outside Berrima. And in the dark, with the bush quiet around them and the fire burned down, Lynch struck Landrigan from behind with the tomahawk, took the £40, took the man's hat, took his belt, then stacked brush over the body by the roadside and left before morning. Why take the hat? Why take the belt? A man thinking clearly leaves those things where they lie. Lynch took them anyway. And those 2 unnecessary items, those small, irrational trophies, were the things that would finally pull the thread loose. 3 days later, Hugh Tinney's dingo found what was left. When the surgeons examined the body, they weren't just recording a wound, they were reading a story. Landrigan had been struck once from behind with enormous force. His skull had been pulverized by a single blow. His hands showed no defensive marks, no broken fingers, no torn skin, nothing. He hadn't struggled. He hadn't turned. The blow came before he knew there was anything to turn toward. The expression on Kearns Landrigan's face, according to those who examined it, was one of good humor. He had been mid-thought when it happened. Something agreeable. He had trusted the wrong man over dinner. And here is where the trap Lynch thought he'd escaped started to close. John Chalker, who kept a public house on the road and knew most travelers by face, came to identify the remains. He knew Landrigan without hesitation. He also told police something that altered everything. Landrigan had stopped at his establishment 2 nights before the body was found, in the company of a man he knew as John Dunleavy. The constable went to the road near the bridge and found cart tracks. One wheel had seized, dragging against the clay instead of rolling, leaving a flat, scraping mark that no other cart in the district was making. The tracks led south, toward Wombat Brush. Police arrived at the Mulligan farm on February 21st, 1842. John Dunleavy was there. He was wearing Kearns Landrigan's hat. His shirt was blood-stained. The seized wheel of his cart matched the dragging mark in the clay beside the ironstone bridge precisely. And he said his name was John Dunleavy. He said he knew nothing about any death. The barmaid from the Woolpack Inn identified him before he finished the sentence. Not Dunleavy, Lynch. John Lynch, formerly of the Oldbury estate, acquitted of Thomas Smyth's murder in 1836, standing now in a dead man's hat, with blood on his shirt, and a seized wheel that had drawn a line through the clay straight back to a body in a brush pile. On March 21st, 1842, Lynch appeared before Chief Justice Sir James Dowling at the Berrima courthouse. The evidence arrived in pieces: the tracks, the wheel, the hat, the shirt, the barmaid's testimony, Chalker's testimony, the identification, the missing 40 pounds. The jury deliberated for 1 hour. Guilty. After the verdict, the court heard additional evidence connecting Lynch to the Mulligans, the Frasers, Edmund Ireland, the Aboriginal boy, and Thomas Smyth. Facing the end of every story he had left to tell, Lynch confessed. He had killed 10 people. He believed God had been watching over him the entire time. He specifically noted that 2 men named Laga and Lee, who had performed an Irish jig for him the night after he killed Edmund Ireland and the boy, had been spared because he had enjoyed their company. That was his arithmetic. Enjoyment bought you your life. Nothing else guaranteed it. He expressed no remorse. He expressed a baffled theological confidence, like a man reviewing evidence that still appeared to him to point in his favor. On April 22nd, 1842, John Lynch was hanged at Berrima Jail. In September 2019, 183 years after Thomas Smyth was put in the ground at Sutton Forest, with his killer still walking free, the Berrima District Historical and Family History Society installed a plaque in the churchyard. It marks the graves of 6 of Lynch's victims: Thomas Smyth, John and Bridget Mulligan, the children Johnny and Mary McNamara, and Kearns Landrigan. 6 names in stone finally placed where people would walk past and stop and read them. Smyth had entered a plowing match in 1829. He had put his name on a list, stood beside other men, and let his work be judged. He had given evidence because someone needed to, and it cost him everything. He didn't get justice in 1836. The system that acquitted his killer saw to that. But one September morning, almost 2 centuries later, when someone put his name in stone, the gum trees stood around the graves the same way they always have, pale, still, dropping their bark, unmoved. The country doesn't mourn, but we do. And that is exactly why these stories have to be told. If this case stayed with you, you're exactly where you belong. Black fears exist to find the people official history left in the ground, the forgotten victims, the overlooked verdicts, the names that have been waiting 200 years for someone to say them out loud. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. drop a comment below. Tell us what you make of Lynch, of Smyth, of the 1836 acquittal that gave a serial killer 6 more years to operate. We read every single one. Thomas Smyth's name is on a plaque now. That's not nothing.